I'll pay you $1 million to pretend to be my wife, the Duke laughed, but her response left him speechless. And to think, Duke Alistair Davenport said, his voice dripping with contempt as he raised his champagne flute toward Ilara. I'm offering you $1 million to play dress-up for a year. Honestly, that's more money than someone like you could earn in 10 lifetimes. The entire hall fell silent. 200 members of Britain's elite, lavishing diamonds and drowning in inherited wealth, turned to watch the spectacle unfolding near the marble staircase. Ilara Vance froze, her waitress uniform suddenly a scarlet letter under the weight of the collective gaze. The silver tray in her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the white-hot rage building in her chest. The Duke's laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling, cruel and sharp as broken glass. What none of them knew, what the Duke himself couldn't imagine, was that his words had sealed his fate, because the woman before him, the one he had just publicly humiliated, was about to teach him a lesson that would shatter everything he thought he knew about power, money, and the price of a human soul. But to understand how a simple waitress brought a duke to his knees, we need to go back 3 hours. 3 hours earlier, the Collision Ashworth mansion gleamed like a jewel box that autumn evening, every chandelier sparkling, every surface polished to an indescribable sheen. Ilara had worked dozens of these events over the past 2 years, catering services that paid her bills and financed her evening classes, but tonight felt different. The air crackled with an energy she couldn't name, like the moment before lightning strikes. She balanced a tray of champagne flutes with ease, weaving between groups of guests who spoke with that distinctive accent born of centuries of privilege. They didn't see her. To them, she was just a piece of furniture, part of the elegant backdrop of their glittering world. That's when she collided with him. One moment she was skirting a marble column, the next she bumped into a wall of expensive wool and masculine perfume. The tray tilted dangerously. Strong hands caught it and her wrist before disaster struck. "Careful," said a deep voice, thick with irritation. "That champagne costs more than your monthly salary." Ilara looked up, an apology on her lips, and found herself staring into the coldest grey eyes she had ever seen. The man before her was devastating in the way Greek statues were devastating, all sharp angles and aristocratic features, his dark hair slicked back to reveal a face that looked as if it had been minted. He wore his tuxedo like armor, every line impeccable, every detail exuding a richness so ancient it had forgotten its own origins. Duke Alistair Davenport. She recognized him from the society pages, though no photograph had fully captured the arrogance that radiated from him like heat from asphalt. "I apologize, Your Grace," she said, steadying the tray and stepping back. "It won't happen again." His eyes raked her with the heat of an inspector. "Make sure that doesn't happen. I'm sure your employer would hate to lose this contract because of a clumsy girl." Something in his tone, that casual cruelty, that absolute certainty that she was his inferior, made Ilara straighten. She'd spent years biting her tongue, swallowing her pride, accepting that this was the way the world worked. But something snapped in that moment. "I'm sure you will," she said, her voice as sweet as honey. "Just as I'm sure your guest would hate to know that the Duke of Davenport can't conduct a party without encountering the servants." Their eyes widened slightly. Around them, several guests had stopped their conversations, sensing the drama. "What did you say?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I said," Ilara stared at him unblinkingly, "that perhaps your Grace should watch her step. The world doesn't rearrange itself around her, despite what she might think." For a moment, just a blink, she saw something flicker in those cold grey eyes. Surprise, intrigue. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by something far more dangerous. Wounded pride. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he said softly. "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Ilara replied. "Someone who confuses a title with a personality." She pulled away before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she heard the sharp intake of breath, the whispered sighs. She had just committed social suicide. But, God, it felt good. What she didn't see was the way Duke Alistair Davenport stared at her, his jaw set and his mind already calculating revenge. 2 hours later, Ilara was exhausted. Her feet ached. Her face ached from maintaining a pleasant expression, and she wanted nothing more than to return to her small apartment and forget that night had ever happened. She was collecting empty glasses near the main staircase when she heard his voice again. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment." Her blood ran cold. Duke Alistair stood on the landing, commanding the room with the natural authority of one born to power. His eyes scanned the crowd until they found her, and his smile was pure predator. "I'm in an amusing situation," he continued, his voice echoing effortlessly through the room. "Due to the archaic terms of my grandmother's will, I need a wife. A temporary wife, of course. Someone to fill a role for the next 12 months while I secure certain business interests." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Ilara tried to slip toward the service door, but his next words froze her. "And I decided that our charming waitress here," he pointed directly at her, "would be perfect for the role." All eyes in the room turned to her. Ilara felt her face flush, a mixture of humiliation and fury rising in her throat. Duke Alistair descended the stairs with the grace of a panther, stopping directly in front of her. Up close, she could see the cruel amusement dancing in his eyes. It was punishment for her earlier audacity, a public humiliation meant to put her back in her place. "What do you say?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'll pay you $1 million to pretend to be my wife for a year. You'd have to attend events, smile beautifully, and play the devoted wife. Surely that's a fair price for someone in your position." He laughed then, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. Around them, others joined him, some nervous, others genuinely amused by the spectacle of the Duke toying with the servants. $1 million. A fortune. Money that would change her life. He expected her to fall at his feet in gratitude, to accept his cruel generosity with tears of joy. But what Duke Alistair Davenport didn't understand about Ilara Vance was that she had learned long ago that not everything had a price. Some things, dignity, self-respect, the essence of who you were, couldn't be bought, no matter how many zeros appeared on the check. The room held its breath. Ilara set down the tray with deliberate care, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She looked at the Duke, truly looked at him, and saw beyond the handsome facade to the empty man beneath. A man who had never been told no, who had never learned that wealth could not fill the void where his humanity should be. When she spoke, her voice was clear and calm, cutting through the expectant silence like a knife. $1 million, she said slowly, is the price you put on your dignity, Your Grace, not on mine. His smile faltered. Around him, the guests gathered closer, sensing something unexpected was happening. "I don't want your money," Ilara continued, her eyes fixed on his, "but I accept your proposal, on one condition." The Duke's face underwent a remarkable transformation, from smug superiority to confusion and, finally, to something that almost resembled respect, but it was quickly replaced by irritation. "One condition," he repeated, his voice tense. "You're a waitress with student debt and, I'm guessing, about $300 in your bank account. I'm offering you $1 million, and you're imposing conditions." "Yes," Ilara said simply. "If you want me to pretend to be your wife for a year, then once a week, for one whole day, you will live in my world. You will do what I do, go where I go, see how the people you despise really live. No complaints, no excuses, no running back to your castle when things get uncomfortable." The silence in the hall was absolute. A widow gasped. Someone dropped their champagne glass, the crash like a gunshot in the silence. Duke Alistair stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "You're crazy," he said flatly. "Maybe," Ilara agreed. "But these are my terms. 1 year playing your devoted wife, and 1 year discovering that the world doesn't revolve around your title and your bank account. Take it or leave it." For a long moment, he said nothing. She could see the war raging behind his eyes, fury at being challenged, humiliation at being cornered in front of his peers, and, beneath it all, a tiny flicker of something she couldn't name. Curiosity, perhaps, or the recognition that he'd finally met someone who couldn't be bought. "This is ridiculous," he said finally. but his voice lacked conviction. "Then find another fake wife," Ilara replied with a shrug. "Sarge, I'm sure there are plenty of people here who would happily stoop for your money, but they'll want cash. I want something far more valuable. I want you to remember what it's like to be human." He gritted his teeth. She could practically see him calculating, weighing his options. Whatever inheritance or business he needed a wife for must be important. Desperate, even. Otherwise, he would have laughed in her face and had security escort her out. "Planned fine," he said, forcing the word through his teeth. "We have a deal, but don't think for a second that this little power play makes you my equal." Ilara smiled then, a genuine smile, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "I don't need to be like you, Your Grace. I just need you to be human. We'll see which of us succeeds in our goal." She turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving him alone on the marble floor while 200 aristocrats whispered and watched. What Ilara didn't see was the way Duke Alistair Davenport watched her disappear through the service door, his hand pressed unconsciously to his chest, his heart doing something it hadn't done in years. 3 days later, Ilara sat in the most intimidating office she had ever seen. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, windows overlooking Hyde Park, and a desk that could have served as a landing pad for small aircraft. Duke Alistair, call me Alistair if we're to be married, even fake, sat across from her, his lawyer at his side and a stack of papers between them. "This is the contract," explained the lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. "It outlines the terms of your agreement. You will live at Davenport Hall for the duration of the agreement, attend all necessary social events, and maintain the appearance of a genuine marriage. In return, at the end of the year, you will receive $1 million, paid in full." "And my condition?" Ilara asked, her eyes on Alistair. He looked like he'd chewed on glass. "That's also included. Every Wednesday, I will spend the entire day participating in whatever menial activities you deem necessary for my education." The word dripped with sarcasm. "It's not servile," Ilara corrected gently. "Seriously, you'll see how real people live." "Same thing," he muttered, signing his name with an aggressive flourish. The lawyer cleared his throat. "There are additional clauses. No romantic involvements outside of marriage. No talking to the press." "No, I'm not interested in romance," Ilara interrupted, "nor in fame. I just want to make sure the Duke here remembers that money doesn't make you better than anyone else." Alistair's eyes lit up. "I never said yes." "You didn't have to." She picked up the pen and signed her name next to his. "Your whole life says that for you." For an instant, their eyes met across the table, and something electric passed between them. Tension, yes. Mutual antipathy, certainly, but beneath it all, a current of defiance, of recognition that somehow they were locked in a battle of wills that only one of them could win. "Welcome to the family, Lady Davenport," the lawyer said with a faint smile. "The wedding will be a small civil ceremony, as per the Duke's instructions, this Friday." Ilara felt a knot in her stomach. Friday. "Like I'd 4 days from now. The inheritance clause requires marriage by the end of the month," Alistair explained, his voice professional, "and the month ends in 6 days. We don't have time for a long engagement." "Of course not," Ilara murmured. "God forbid you plan anything that doesn't revolve around your needs." He leaned forward, his grey eyes intense. "Let me make one thing clear, Ilara. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. You will do your part. I will do mine. And in a year we will both emerge richer from this experience. Do not mistake my agreement with your ridiculous condition for anything resembling respect or affection." She mirrored his stance, leaning in until they were close enough for her to see the silver flecks in his eyes. "And don't mistake my acceptance of your offer for anything resembling desperation or admiration. I'm doing this because I believe that even someone as cold and arrogant as you has the capacity to change. Consider this a social experiment." "I'm not a lab rat," he growled. "No," she agreed, leaning back. "You are a man who has forgotten how to be human. But don't worry, Your Grace. I am an excellent teacher." The lawyer looked at them nervously. "Shall I leave you two to discuss the arrangements?" "No need," Alistair said curtly, standing up. "We're done here. Ilara, you'll be moving into Davenport Hall on Thursday. My assistant will send you the details." "How generous of you to give me 2 days' notice," Ilara said dryly. "I'm very accommodating," he replied with a cold smile. "Oh, and Ilara, don't get so comfortable. This is temporary. In a year, you'll be back in your little apartment and your little life, and all of this," he gestured broadly to the opulent office, "will be nothing but a memory." She stood and grabbed her bag. "We'll see about that, Your Grace. After all, the biggest changes often come from the most unexpected places." As she left the office, she heard him say something to the lawyer, too low for her to understand. But she could have sworn it sounded like, "What have I gotten myself into?" She smiled to herself. He had no idea, but he would soon. Friday dawned grey and cold, a perfectly appropriate setting for a marriage built on mutual antagonism and business necessity. Ilara stood in front of the mirror in her tiny apartment, looking at herself in the simple cream dress she'd bought at a department store sale. It was pretty, knee-length mane with lace sleeves and a subtle neckline, but it wasn't anyone's dream dress. But this wasn't anyone's dream wedding. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a woman in her 50s, elegant and efficient-looking, carrying a bag of clothes. "Miss Vance, I'm Margaret, the Duke's personal attendant. His Grace thought you might need... Well, he was worried your dress might not look good in photos." Ilara bristled. "Of course." Margaret's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Between you and me, honey, I think he just wanted to make sure you didn't show up in jeans to piss him off." She held out the bag of clothes. "This is completely optional, but it might make the photos more believable." Curiosity overcame pride. Ilara unzipped her bag and gasped. Inside was a dress that probably cost more than her car. Vintage lace, champagne-colored, with an elegant silhouette that managed to be both modest and stunning. "It was his grandmother's," Margaret said softly, "from her second marriage. He doesn't know I know this, but he spent 3 hours last night going through her things to find it." Ilara looked up sharply. 3 o'clock? "He cares more than he lets on," Margaret said with a meaningful look. "It's about a lot of things. Now, can I help you with this? We have a wedding to go to." 20 minutes later, Ilara stood at the registry office, holding hands with Alistair as they exchanged vows that meant nothing and everything at the same time. He looked devastatingly handsome in his dark grey suit, his expression unreadable as he slipped a ring on her finger, a simple platinum band that somehow felt heavier than it looked. When the clerk pronounced them man and wife, Alistair leaned in for the obligatory kiss. It was supposed to be perfunctory, a brief press of lips to seal the deal. But the moment his mouth touched hers, something changed. His hand came up to cup her face, gently in a way she never imagined he was capable of, and the kiss deepened for only a moment before he pulled away, his eyes wide with shock. "Congratulations," the registrar said cheerfully, oblivious to the tension building between them. Ilara touched her lips, stunned. That kiss had felt real, dangerously real. "Come on," Alistair said dryly, already walking toward the door. "We have to keep up appearances." But what neither of them could escape was the truth that hung in the air between them. Something had just begun, and it was far more complex than either of them had imagined. True to contract, the following Wednesday arrived with the inevitability of a storm. Ilara stood in the grand foyer of Davenport Hall at precisely 6 in the morning, watching Alistair descend the grand staircase with all the enthusiasm of a man walking to his own execution. He was dressed more casually, or what he probably thought was more casually, designer jeans that cost more than most people's monthly rent, a dark grey cashmere sweater, expensive leather boots. He looked like a perfume at Joyce, not someone prepared for actual work. "Those won't do," Ilara said, pointing to her boots. "What's wrong with them?" "They're too pretty. You'll ruin them." She held out a pair of work boots. "These are more appropriate." He looked at her worn, scuffed boots as if she'd handed him a dead fish. "You expect me to wear those?" "I expect you to fulfill your part of the contract," she replied calmly. "So unless you want to cancel our agreement on the 6th day of our wedding." He gritted his teeth, but sat down and changed his boots. "Where exactly are we going?" "You'll see." An hour later, they were in the kitchen of a homeless shelter in East London. The director, a formidable woman named Sister Mary Catherine, looked Alistair up and down with the indifferent air of someone who had seen it all. "So you're here to help, are you?" she asked skeptically. "What can you do?" "I run a multi-million-dollar investment firm," Alistair said, clearly hoping this would impress her. Sister Mary Catherine snorted. "How you know how to cut vegetables?" "I suppose." "Then start cutting. We have 200 people to feed by noon." For the next 6 hours, Duke Alistair Davenport, heir to one of Britain's oldest fortunes, an Oxford graduate and a member of the House of Lords, chopped vegetables. His hands, which had never done work as strenuous as signing documents, blistered. His back ached from standing. His designer sweater was splattered with tomato sauce. And Ilara watched it all, serving meals alongside him, witnessing the exact moment his irritation gave way to something else. It happened when a little girl, maybe 6 years old, looked up at him with toothless joy and said, "Thank you for my lunch, sir." His hand stilled on the shell. He looked at her, really looked, perhaps for the first time seeing beyond statistics and social classes to the real human being before him. "You're welcome," he said softly, and his voice was different, gentler. At the end of the day, they sat on the back steps of the shelter, exhausted and sore. Alistair stared at his blistered hands in disbelief. "I had no idea," he said calmly. "No idea what?" "How hard people work just to survive. How many people—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I've been donating to charities for years, but I've never actually seen this. The people behind the statistics." Ilara felt something in her chest soften dangerously. "That's why you needed to do this. Money makes it too easy to keep the world at bay." He looked at her, really looked, and she saw the walls cracking. Just a little, just enough. "It doesn't change anything," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "Isn't it?" she asked gently. He stood up abruptly. "We should go. I have meetings tomorrow." But as they walked toward the car, Ilara saw him look back at the shelter, and something in his expression told her the world had just shifted beneath her feet. He just didn't know yet. But what neither of them realized was that their carefully constructed agreement was about to face its first real test, and the truth that would emerge would threaten everything they had built. 3 weeks after the agreement, Davenport Hall had become a battleground of subtle tensions and unspoken truths. Ilara had moved into the East Wing, her rooms separated from Alistair's by a maze of corridors and centuries of aristocratic tradition. They maintained the fiction of marriage in public, attending galas, hosting dinners, posing for the occasional society photo, but in private they circled each other like wary opponents, waiting for the other to make the first move. Every Wednesday, without fail, Alistair accompanied Ilara to what he once dismissively called the real world. They served meals in soup kitchens, tutored children in underprivileged schools, volunteered at a women's shelter, and spent a memorable and grueling day working alongside sanitation workers. Each experience eroded something inside him, like water eroding stone. Ilara watched the transformation with a mixture of satisfaction and something much more dangerous, tenderness. It was a Thursday night when everything changed. She found him in the library, surrounded by ledgers and looking more distraught than ever. The confident, arrogant Duke had been replaced by a man who seemed genuinely distressed. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting down in the chair across from him. He looked up, surprised. They rarely saw each other outside of their scheduled obligations. "Nothing to worry about." "We're married," she pointed out dryly. "Even if it's fake, people expect me to at least pretend to care about their problems." A faint smile crossed his face. "I'm reviewing the estate's finances. My grandmother's will had conditions that I didn't fully understand when I agreed to them. As—" he hesitated, then sighed. "The inheritance doesn't just require me to be married. It requires me to demonstrate responsible stewardship of the family legacy. I thought that meant maintaining the properties, continuing the business ventures. But there's a clause that gives the executors discretion to determine whether I'm using the fortunes as intended by the deceased." Ilara leaned forward. And they're threatening to revoke the inheritance. They say I've shown no genuine commitment to anything other than accumulating more wealth, that I've treated the family legacy like a personal ATM, rather than a responsibility to do good in the world. His voice was bitter, but beneath it she heard something else. Shame. What happens if they revoke it? She asked softly. The fortune would go to charity, all of it. I'd get Davenport Hall and a modest trust fund, but everything else... He gestured helplessly at the ledgers. Gone. And more than that, I'd be seen as the Duke who failed the family legacy. My grandmother's final judgment that I was unworthy. The pain in his voice was raw and real, and Elara felt her heart break against her will. She had spent weeks telling herself that his transformation was just an act, that he was adapting to her circumstances, remaining fundamentally unchanged. But this was genuine vulnerability. Then prove them wrong, she said firmly. He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. What? Serving a few meals at a shelter? They want evidence of sustained commitment, of genuine change. They want me to be someone I've never been. No, Elara corrected, standing and walking to his side of the table. They want you to be someone you've forgotten how to be. There's a difference. He looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw him without his armor. Just a man, lost and afraid, trying to live up to a legacy he didn't understand. I don't know how, he admitted quietly. She made a decision, one she knew would complicate everything. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers closing around his. Then let me help you, she said, not as part of our agreement, just because I want to. His eyes searched hers, searching for the angle, the manipulation, but all he found was sincerity, and it left him speechless. Why? He finally asked. Why would you help me after everything I've done? The way I've treated you? Because, Elara said simply, I saw who you could be. These past few weeks, watching you struggle with things that come naturally to most people, watching you actually try, that person is worth saving. Even if you don't believe it yet. Something snapped in his expression. He pulled his hand away from hers, stood abruptly, and turned toward the window. His shoulders were rigid, his voice firm when he spoke. Don't do that. Don't do what? Don't make me believe I could be better. Don't give me hope just to watch it die. Elara moved to stand beside him, looking out at the manicured gardens stretching into the darkness. I'm not giving you hope. Hope isn't something someone gives you. It's something you choose to have. He turned to face her, and she was stunned to see his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm not good at this, he said bluntly. Feelings. Caring about things other than profit margins and social status. My father taught me that emotions are weakness, that caring too much makes you vulnerable, and then he died angry and alone, leaving me to inherit his empire and his emptiness. You are not your father, Elara said firmly. Isn't it? His laugh was bitter. I've spent 15 years perfecting your legacy of cold indifference, until you came into my life with your impossible conditions and your stubborn refusal to be bought. I never questioned whether there was another way to live. And now I'm terrified, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, because for the first time in my life, I want something I can't buy, I can't bargain for, I can't control, and I have no idea what to do about it. The air between them crackled with tension. Elara knew she should back away, maintain the careful distance they'd established, but she couldn't because she felt it too, that dangerous pull towards something real amidst the carefully constructed fiction. Then stop trying to control it, she said softly. Just feel it, whatever it is. He reached out, hovering near her face, trembling slightly. If I do this, he said, if I care, I won't be able to take it back. At the end of the year, when the contract expires, we'll deal with it when the time comes, Elara interrupted. But right now, at this moment, maybe we could stop pretending this is just business. His hand cupped her cheek, warm and gentle, and when he leaned in to kiss her, it was nothing like a perfunctory wedding kiss. It was slow, deep, and achingly tender, a question and an answer all at once. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. "I don't know how to do this," Alistair whispered against her forehead. "Me neither," Ilara admitted. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we'll figure it out together." What they didn't know was that someone was watching them through the library window, and the photograph they had just taken would arrive on the desk of the estate's executors in the morning, proof, they would claim, of a marriage of calculated convenience rather than genuine commitment. The real battle for Alistair's soul was about to begin. The summons arrived 3 days later, delivered by a stern-faced lawyer who handed Alistair a sealed envelope bearing the family crest. Ilara watched his face pale as he read the contents. "They're launching a formal investigation," he said, his tone deflated. "The enforcers, they want to interview the staff, review our social calendar, and are sending someone to observe us for the next month to determine if our marriage is genuine." "Can they do that?" Ilara asked, anger rising in her chest. "According to the will, yes. My grandmother was apparently worried about exactly that scenario. Someone entering into a marriage of convenience to secure their inheritance." He laughed humorlessly. "She always knew me very well. So what do we do?" He looked at her, and she saw the walls rising again, the vulnerable man from 3 nights ago hiding behind his armor. "We do what we've been doing. We maintain the fiction. We give them no reason to doubt us." "Alistair, this doesn't change anything between us," he said firmly, but she heard the lie in his voice. "We had an agreement, a contract. What happened the other night was a momentary lapse of judgment." The words hit him like a slap. "A lapse in judgment. What did you expect?" His voice turned cold, defensive. "That we'd fall in love like in a fairy tale, that a few weeks of playing house would turn me into Prince Charming. This is the real world, Ilara. People like me don't change. We adapt temporarily when necessary, but ultimately, we remain who we've always been." She stared at him, seeing the fear behind the cruelty. He was pushing her away, protecting himself from the vulnerability of caring too much, but knowing this didn't make his words hurt any less. "Okay," she said softly, "if that's what you want to believe, I won't stop you. But you're wrong about one thing." "What is that?" "People like you don't exist. There's only you, a man, making choices every day about who he wants to be. And now you're choosing to be a coward." She left before he could answer, her heart breaking for both of them. The estate representative arrived on Monday. Her name was Eleanor Ashford, and she was everything Ilara had expected. Middle-aged, impeccably dressed, with piercing eyes that missed nothing and a smile that never reached them. "Lady Davenport," she said, extending her hand. "What a pleasure to finally meet you. The society pages are buzzing with talk of the Duke's unexpected marriage." "I'm sure it will," Ilara replied calmly. "People love a scandal." "Or a fairy tale," Eleanor retorted. "Which one is it, I wonder?" For the next 3 weeks, Eleanor Ashford shadowed their lives like a spectre. She attended their dinners, observed their interactions, interviewed the staff. She was polite, even pleasant, but her presence transformed Davenport Hall into a stage where every gesture seemed calculated, every word weighed with authenticity, and Alistair became impossible. He had returned to the cold, arrogant Duke she had known, treating her with distant politeness in public and completely avoiding her in private. The Wednesdays continued by contractual obligation, but he attended with barely concealed resentment, clearly now seeing them as performances for Eleanor's benefit rather than genuine experiences. It was on the 4th Wednesday, when they were volunteering at a community garden in South London, that everything came to a head. They were working side by side, planting winter vegetables, when one of the regular volunteers, an elderly woman named Mrs. Okoye, sat down next to them with a knowing smile. "You two remind me of my late husband and me," she said, her accent a melodic mix of Nigerian and London, always fighting, always pulling apart, but underneath it all, so much love it hurt just to look at. "We're not," Alistair began. "Oh, hush," Mrs. Okoye interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "I've been married 3 times and buried 2 husbands. I know love when I see it. even when the people involved are too stubborn to admit it. Elara focused intently on the seedling she was planting, not trusting herself to speak. The thing about love, Mrs. Okoye continued, is that it requires you to be brave, to risk everything, your pride, your protectiveness, your carefully constructed walls. Most people can't. They'd rather be safe and alone than vulnerable and united. That's very philosophical, Alistair said stiffly. But not everyone believes in fairy tales. Mrs. Okoye laughed, rich and full. Who said anything about fairies? Fairy tales? I'm talking about true love, which is much more confusing, difficult, and beautiful than any fairy tale. True love means choosing someone every day, even when that person is difficult, especially when they are difficult. She stood, brushing the dirt from her hands. My Benjamin, he was a proud man. He came from a wealthy family in Lagos, lost everything when we fled during the war. He wouldn't accept help, wouldn't admit weakness. He nearly destroyed us with his pride. She looked directly at Alistair. But one day, he realized that being strong didn't mean never falling. It meant having the courage to let someone hold you up. She walked away, leaving them in silence. Elara drove the shovel into the ground with more force than necessary. Don't worry. I don't expect you to let anyone catch you. Elara. No. She turned to face him, her eyes shining. You can't do this. You can't open up to me, show me who you really are, kiss me wholeheartedly, and then slam the door in my face the moment things get complicated. That's not being strong, Alistair. That's being terrified. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, he said, his voice low and urgent. If they determine our marriage is a sham, I lose everything. My grandmother's legacy, the family's reputation, the ability to do whatever good I've finally begun to see needs to be done. I can't afford to be distracted by... Why? She challenged. For feelings? For the possibility that this arrangement could have become something real. For you, the words burst from him, raw and desperate. I can't afford to be distracted by you, by the way you make me feel, by the way my whole world has tilted since you came into my life with your impossible conditions and your unshakable certainty that I could be better. The other volunteers stopped working, watching them with undisguised interest. Alistair seemed to notice this, his face flushing as he stood abruptly. We must go, he said dryly. We have fulfilled our obligation for the day. But as they walked toward the car, Elara saw his hands shaking and understood. He wasn't pushing her away because he didn't care. He was pushing her away because he cared too much, and it terrified him. The question was, would he overcome this fear before it destroyed them both? The breaking point. Eleanor Ashford requested a private dinner with them on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks into her observation. They sat in the formal dining room, crystal and silver gleaming in the candlelight, while she watched them with those piercing, assessing eyes. I've completed my preliminary assessment, she announced over dessert, and I must say, you two are a real puzzle. What do you mean? Alistair asked, his voice carefully neutral. Well, all the external markers are there. You attend events together, live under the same roof, the staff reports regular interaction, but there's something off, a distance that doesn't quite fit with the fairy tale of the Duke winning over a commoner. Elara felt a knot in her stomach. They had been so careful, but not enough. We're private people, Alistair said softly. I was raised to believe that genuine affection shouldn't be shown in public. Eleanor dabbed her lips with her napkin. And yet, I've also heard reports of something quite interesting. Your weekly excursions, homeless shelters, community gardens, under-resourced schools. Quite unusual activities for a duke, don't you think? My wife opened my eyes to the importance of direct involvement in charity, Alistair replied. So instead of simply writing checks, how convenient, Eleanor said dryly, that this awakening of social consciousness has coincided exactly with the challenge to your inheritance. It seems almost calculated, as if someone suggested these activities to make you seem more worthy of your grandmother's fortune. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. That's not, Elara began, but Alistair interrupted her. You're right, he said calmly. Elara turned her head sharply to face him. Alistair, what are you doing? He ignored her, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. You're absolutely right. This marriage began as a calculated arrangement. I needed a wife to fulfill the terms of the inheritance, and Ilara needed, well, financial security. We entered into a contract, a business agreement. Alistair, stop, Ilara said urgently, but he continued as if he hadn't heard her. And yes, she set conditions. She demanded that I spend time seeing how the rest of the world lived. She wanted to prove that I could be better than the arrogant, conceited aristocrat I was, and I agreed because I had no choice. Eleanor sat back, satisfaction written all over her face. So you admit the marriage is a fraud? No, Alistair said, and his voice changed, became raw and real. I admit that's how it started. But that's not what it became. He turned to Ilara and she saw it all in his eyes. Fear, hope, and a desperate, terrifying vulnerability. For 34 years I lived exactly one way, he continued, addressing Ilara now, forgetting Eleanor. I measured my worth in pounds sterling and social status. I treated people as resources to be managed, obstacles to be overcome, or irrelevant background noise. I was cold and calculating, convinced that emotions were weaknesses. His voice cracked. And then you appeared. You, with your pride, your principles, and your absolute refusal to be anything other than who you are. You looked at me, at all my wealth, power, and position, and were unimpressed. You saw right through to the empty man beneath. Ilara felt tears sting her eyes. Alistair, I'm not done yet. He stood, walking around the desk to kneel beside her chair. You demanded that I see the world through new eyes, that I spend time with people I'd never noticed, doing work I'd never valued. And, my God, I resented you for it. Every Wednesday, I cursed your name. I told myself I was just playing, fulfilling a contract. He took her hands in his and she felt them tremble. But somewhere along the line, something changed. That little girl thanking me for lunch, Mrs. Okoye talking about courage, the teacher at that underfunded school telling me that my presence mattered more than any check I could write. And you, always you, showing me that there was more to life than the narrow prison I'd built around myself. Your Grace, Eleanor interrupted uneasily, that is highly irregular. I don't care, Alistair said, his eyes never leaving Ilara's face. Let them revoke the inheritance. Let them take every pound, every property, every bit of my grandmother's fortune. Because I've finally figured out what she was really trying to teach me. What is it? Ilara whispered. Being worthy of a legacy isn't about maintaining wealth or status. It's about being worthy of love, real love, the kind that requires you to be vulnerable, courageous, and better than you ever imagined yourself to be. Tears streamed down Ilara's face. So you are worthy, she said softly. You always were, you just had to believe. He laughed, a sound somewhere between a sob and joy. I don't know if I'm worthy, but I know I'm in love with you, Ilara Vance. Completely, terribly, irrevocably in love. And if that costs me everything else, so be it. Because losing you would cost me something far more valuable. It would cost me the man I've finally begun to become. The dining room was utterly silent. Eleanor Ashford stood motionless, her notebook forgotten. And Ilara looked at this proud, wounded man kneeling before her, offering her not his wealth or his title, but his heart, the one thing he had never given to anyone. You idiot, she said, laughing through her tears. I've been in love with you for weeks. Why do you think I stayed, even when you pushed me away? Why do you think every Wednesday broke my heart a little more, watching you discover your own humanity and knowing you'd never let yourself keep it? I'll take this now, he said vehemently. I'll take it all. The vulnerability, the tenderness, the terrifying joy of waking up and knowing you exist in the world. He stood, pulling her up, and kissed her with a desperation that spoke of weeks of denial, of walls crumbling, of two people finally admitting the truth they'd been hiding since that first collision at the party. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, they had completely forgotten about Eleanor. She cleared her throat deliberately. Well, she said, her voice strangely hoarse, I believe I have what I need for my report. Alistair turned to her, Ilara's hand still clasped in his. And what will this report say? Eleanor gathered her papers, but Ilara could have sworn she saw tears in the older woman's eyes. It will tell you that the Duke of Davenport has demonstrated a genuine and lasting transformation of character, that his marriage, though it may have begun as an arrangement, has clearly evolved into something much more authentic, and that his grandmother would be proud of the man he has become. She paused at the door. Is it worth it, Your Grace? She created that inheritance clause knowing exactly what would happen. She knew you needed someone to challenge you, to see past your defenses, to demand better from you. She just needed to create the circumstances for you to meet that person. After she left, Alistair pulled Ilara close, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you, he murmured. Probably not, she agreed, her voice muffled against his chest. But you'll spend the rest of your life trying to win me over anyway. The rest of my life? He pulled back to look at her, hope shining in his eyes. So that means, it means the contract is null and void, Ilara said firmly. I don't want your $1 million, Alistair. I never did. I wanted you to remember how to be human, and now that you have, I won't let you go. What about your condition, Wednesdays? She smiled, touching his face with infinite gentleness. It continues, not because of a contract, but because it's who we are now, who we choose to be, together. The truth revealed. 2 months later, on a crisp December morning, Ilara found Alistair in his office, surrounded by plans and proposals. He looked up when she entered, and his face broke into that smile that still made her heart race. The real smile, the one he'd never shown the world before. What's all this? She asked, sitting on the arm of his chair. The future, he said, pulling her onto his lap. I've been working with the Foundation's board to restructure how we use the family fortune. Half of the investment income will go toward funding the kinds of programs we've been volunteering with, community gardens, homeless shelters, educational initiatives. Alistair, this is amazing. It's not enough, he said seriously. It will never be enough to solve all the problems we see, but it's a start. And it's what my grandmother would have wanted, to use our privilege as a tool for real good, not just social status. Ilara kissed him softly. She would be so proud of you. I hope so. He paused, suddenly nervous. Actually, there's one more thing. I found a letter she left for me, to be opened only after the inheritance was settled. Eleanor gave it to me yesterday. He handed Ilara a yellowed envelope, addressed in elegant handwriting. She opened it carefully and read, My dear Alistair, if you're reading this, it means you passed my little test, though I suspect it wasn't a small one. You're probably furious with me for manipulating you, for imposing conditions on your inheritance. But I hope by now you understand why I did it. I watched you grow stronger with each passing year after your father's death. I watched you build walls, treat life as a series of transactions, measure your worth in pounds and property. And my heart broke, because I knew the real you, the boy who cried when his dog died, who spent hours reading to his little sister, who had the capacity to feel such immense love. That boy was buried under expectations, sadness, and his father's cold philosophy. But he was still there, waiting for someone to dig him out. I knew you needed 2 things, a genuine challenge and a worthy opponent, someone who couldn't be bought, who demanded the best from you and refused to settle for less, someone who saw not the Duke, but the man. I also knew you'd never find that person naturally. You'd grown too comfortable in your isolation, too accustomed to keeping people at a distance, so I created the circumstances. The inheritance clause was designed to force you into exactly the kind of deal that would either destroy you or rebuild you. I bet on your intelligence and your fundamental decency. I bet that, when truly challenged, you would surpass expectations, and I bet that you would be smart enough or lucky enough to find someone extraordinary to challenge you. If you've fallen truly and deeply in love with someone who sees your value beyond your wealth, then you've succeeded. If you've learned that the greatest legacy isn't what you leave in property and money, but what you leave in transformed lives and open hearts, then every penny of that fortune has been well spent. Be happy, my dear boy. Be brave enough to be vulnerable, and know that I love you more than all the crown jewels and always will. Your devoted grandmother, Catherine Ilara, finished reading with tears streaming down her face. Alistair was crying too, shamelessly. She knew. he said, amazed. She knew exactly what would happen. She loved you enough to risk everything, so you could become who you were meant to be, Ilara said. That's the real legacy, Alistair. Not the money, the belief that you could be better. He pulled her close, and they sat there in the winter sunlight, two people who started as adversaries and became partners, lovers, soulmates. 6 months later, the royal wedding. The garden at Davenport Hall bloomed with summer flowers, a riot of colour that would have horrified Alistair's ancestors with its lack of formal structure. But Ilara had insisted, if they were going to do this right, it would be done her way, their way. The guest list was unusual for a ducal wedding. Yes, there were aristocrats and business associates, but there were also residents of the homeless shelter, children from the underfunded school, Mrs. Okoye and her extended family, Sister Mary Catherine in her sensible shoes, and dozens of others whose lives had intersected with theirs in recent months. Margaret, Alistair's assistant, served as Ilara's maid of honour. "I told you he cared more than he let on," she whispered as they waited for the ceremony to begin. "You were right," Ilara replied, watching through the window as Alistair greeted the guests with genuine warmth, no longer the cold and distant Duke, but a man who had learned the value of human connection. The ceremony was simple and moving. When it came time to say the vows, Alistair took her hands and spoke from the heart. "Ilara, a year ago, I was a man who thought I had everything and felt nothing. I measured my life in acquisitions and achievements, convinced that emotion was weakness and vulnerability was failure. I was rich and successful, but absolutely, overwhelmingly empty." His voice wavered, but held firm. "You invaded my life, literally, and refused to be impressed by anything I'd built over decades. You saw through my wealth and title to the broken man beneath, and instead of walking away, you demanded I improve. You made me work for it. You made me deserve it. You made me feel it." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Every Wednesday you took me out of my comfortable prison and showed me a world I was too blind to see. Since then, every day, you've shown me that the greatest privilege is not what you have, but what you give. That true power is not control, but vulnerability. That the true legacy is not what you leave in possessions, but what you leave in hearts you touched and lives you changed." He brought her hands to his lips. "I can't promise to be perfect. I'm still learning to be human, to let my guard down, to measure my worth by love given rather than wealth hoarded. But I promise to keep trying. I promise to keep growing. And I promise that every day for the rest of my life, I will choose you, I will choose us both. I will choose this beautiful, terrifying, extraordinary thing we've built together." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. When Ilara spoke, her voice was firm and strong. "Alistair, you once offered me $1 million to pretend to be your wife. I refused because I knew you needed something much more valuable than money. You needed to remember how to be human, how to care, how to love." She smiled through her tears. "What I didn't expect was to fall in love with you in the process, to see you transform from a man who saw people as transactions into someone who sees them as equals, as partners, as infinitely valuable, regardless of bank balance or social status. To witness your courage as you tore down walls you'd spent your life building." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow echoed through the garden. "You think I saved you, but the truth is we saved each other. You taught me that people can change, that redemption is possible, that love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone willing to become better, for themselves, for the world, for each other. So I promise you this. I will keep challenging you. I will never let you forget where you came from or who you have become. I will hold your hand through every Wednesday adventure, through every moment of doubt, through every time you feel tempted to retreat behind your old walls. And I will love you, not despite your flaws, but because you had the courage to face them and grow beyond them." When they kissed, sealing their true vows, the garden erupted in applause. Mrs. Okoye shouted, "That's what I'm talking about," and even Sister Mary Catherine smiled. The Davenport Foundation's 5th anniversary gala was nothing like the party where Ilara and Alistair met. Instead of a stuffy ballroom packed with the usual guests, they transformed an East London warehouse into a celebration of community. Tables of food prepared by shelter residents who had gone through culinary training programs, artwork by children from the youth centers they funded, performances by the community theater groups they sponsored. Ilara was with her 3-year-old daughter, Rose, watching Alistair present an award to one of the scholarship recipients, a young woman who had been homeless 2 years earlier and was now starting medical school. "Your father is crying again," Rose observed with the sincerity of small children. "He does that often now," Ilara agreed, her heart overflowing. "It's a good thing." After the ceremony, they found a quiet corner, Rose already asleep on Alistair's shoulder. "First, remember when you told me $1 million was the price I would pay for my dignity?" Alistair asked softly. "I remember thinking I was really smart," Ilara admitted. "But you were right. I was trying to buy something that can't be bought. Control, certainty, distance from anything that might make me feel vulnerable. What I got in return was far more valuable." "What is that?" He looked at her. This man who had learned to cry in public, who spent his Wednesdays in community gardens and homeless shelters, not because of a contract, but because that was what he had become, who measured his wealth not in pounds but in lives changed and hearts touched. "Everything," he said simply. "I have it all. A partner who challenges me. A daughter who reminds me every day what's truly important. A purpose that goes beyond accumulating wealth, and a life that truly means something." Ilara rested her head on his free shoulder. "She would be proud of you, you know, of your grandmother." "I hope so. I'm certainly trying to live up to the bet she made on me." They stood there together, watching their community celebrate, all these people whose lives intersected with theirs, whose stories became part of their stories, whose presence proved that the greatest privilege was not what you had, but what you gave. "Alistair," Ilara said softly, "try. If you could go back to that night, knowing everything that would happen, the investigation, the fight, the fear, all of it, would you still make that arrogant offer?" He was silent for a long moment, thinking. Then he smiled. The genuine smile that still made her heart race. "In the blink of an eye," he said, "because it brought me here. To you, to Rose, to this life I never knew I needed. My grandmother was right. The greatest inheritance isn't money, property, or titles. It's the ability to love and be loved in return. And that's something you can't buy at any price." "Not even $1 million?" Ilara teased. "Not $1 billion," he replied, kissing her softly. "Some things are priceless, and you taught me to recognize them." As the party continued around them, Ilara thought of that night so long ago when an arrogant duke offered her money to be his pretend wife, and she responded with a condition that changed both their lives. She wanted to teach him humanity. Instead, they both learned something far more valuable, that redemption is possible, that love transforms, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the belief that they can be better than they ever dreamed. And in the end, that belief, that stubborn, extraordinary, transformative belief in one's potential, was worth more than all the fortunes in the world. And now I have a question for you. Do you believe anyone can really change as much as Duke Alistair has? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of love and transformation touched you, please show your support by leaving a like. It's the best way to help our stories reach more people who need to hear them. And to not miss the next chapter, subscribe and turn on the notification bell.